Dan Marino is one of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of the NFL. His peers envied his near-perfect technique, a combination of accuracy and a quick, clean release which he used to fire lasers into tight coverage at almost any distance. Simply put, he was a generational talent. By the end of his first full regular season with the Miami Dolphins, Marino shattered major NFL QB records. For years, he held single-season records in passing yards, completions, and touchdowns. Records that stood until other Hall of Famers arrived to break them. Marino's 17-season career in Miami made him a 9-time Pro Bowler, an NFL MVP, and a first-ballot Hall of Famer in 2005. But when he retired in 2000, he walked away with only one AFC Championship win and no Super Bowl victory. In fact, he is the winningest quarterback to never hoist the Lombardi Trophy. Why is that? How did such an explosive, once-in-a-lifetime talent like Dan Marino end up untitled? In 1983, Dan Marino was crestfallen as he watched 5 other quarterbacks selected ahead of him in the first round of the NFL Draft. Marino was a star quarterback for the Pitt Panthers, playing particularly well in his sophomore and junior seasons. But during his senior year, his numbers dipped, and the Panthers finished that season with a demoralizing loss at the Cotton Bowl. Also, scouts were reportedly less than thrilled about his partying on campus. Narcs. Anyway, Marino was selected as the 27th pick in the first round. But being selected later in the order put Marino on a top contending team, the Miami Dolphins, who had just won the AFC Championship before ultimately losing to Washington in Super Bowl 17. Marino had his work cut out for him, but he'd get to work for a team with winning potential. He made his first NFL start in Week 6 of the 1983 season, replacing flailing veteran David Woodley behind center. He became an instant sensation. Marino was the exact offensive spark that Miami needed. The Dolphins won 9 of their last 10 games of the season and rode that momentum into the playoffs. But in the divisional round against the Seahawks, despite a strong first quarter from Marino, the offense collapsed. And then, in the final minutes, a spectacular implosion by the special teams unit iced the game. Following a Seattle touchdown that gave them a 4-point lead, the ensuing kickoff was fumbled by Miami's Fulton Walker. Seattle recovered, turned that into a field goal a few plays later. Then Walker fumbled again on that kickoff, which Seattle also recovered and this time just ran out the clock. So, a rather sudden and deflating ending to a season otherwise filled with promise. Miami had a new star quarterback. Marino's fellow players named him the AFC starter in the Pro Bowl. Marino was on the cusp of greatness, but would it be enough to take down a juggernaut? 1984 was the best season of Dan Marino's career. It was one of the best seasons a quarterback had ever had. Marino shattered single-season records. He was on another level. His 48 touchdowns were 12 more than the previous record and 16 more than any other quarterback in the league that year. Marino was helped in this effort by his strong receiving corps led by fellow Pro Bowlers Mark Duper and Mark Clayton, collectively the Marks Brothers. Coming up as second stringers together, Marino and the Marks Brothers had a special chemistry that developed into a lethal offensive combination. Clayton even set a record of his own. The Dolphins were also backed by their defensive corps, dubbed the Killer Bees on account of nearly all their last names beginning with B. Clever. In 1983, the Bees allowed fewer points than any defense in the league and carried that stifling ability into 84. The Dolphins stomped the competition, finished 14-2 and rolled into the playoffs. Their first order of business was exacting revenge on the Seahawks. In the AFC Championship game against the Steelers, the Dolphins' offense put together a show of force that included 5 consecutive touchdown drives. Marino snagged a few championship game records while he was at it. Not bad for the 23-year-old, considering he threw his last pass with 11 minutes still left in the game. With that, the Dolphins punched their ticket to Stanford to face off against the best team in the league, the San Francisco 49ers. Powered by one of the league's best quarterbacks in Joe Montana, the 49ers that year became the first to ever win 15 regular season games. They had powerful and versatile offensive weapons in running backs Roger Craig and Wendell Tyler, and a deep threat receiving corps starring Dwight Clark. Their defense allowed the fewest points in the regular season, and all 4 of their starting defensive backs were Pro Bowl selections whose primary objective was to make Marino's life as difficult as possible in Stanford. Despite this, the consensus was that Marino would be unstoppable coming off of his historic regular season performance. Montana, who said his goal was simply winning games, took this personally. By the end of the first quarter, Miami led 10-7, but it would be their last lead of the game. In the second quarter, Marino and the Dolphins went 3-and-out 3 straight times, and the Niners responded to each one with a touchdown. Marino managed to take the Dolphins on a 72-yard drive, only to score a field goal. On the ensuing kick return, a bit of confusion from the Niners' Guy McIntyre led to this fumble and recovery by the Dolphins, which they turned into another field goal just before halftime, but that spark failed to light a fire, and the vaunted Niners defense held the Dolphins scoreless in the second half while piling on another 10 points. The 49ers succeeded by doing exactly what they set out to do: put pressure on and shut down Marino. The Dolphins, despite their talents, were simply outplayed by a historically good squad. Although there was guilt to share, an irritated Marino blamed himself and vowed to make it back to the big game, and soon. So, at only 23, Dan Marino ended his first full NFL season firmly embedded in the record books, and the Dolphins had been to the Super Bowl twice in 3 seasons. The future looked bright in Miami, but could Marino get the organizational support he needed to take them all the way? Despite last season's success, the 1985 season got off to a rocky start. A contract dispute between Marino and Dolphins GM Mike Robbie led to Marino holding out and missing more than a month of training camp. Then, in Week 2, one of his favorite targets went down with a knee injury, and by Week 9 of 1985, Miami had an alarming 5-4 record. But after Duper's return, the Dolphins rallied and won their remaining 7 games, clinching the AFC East for the 5th consecutive year. Tucked in there was Marino's Week 13 rout of the then undefeated Chicago Bears, who had entered the night having allowed just 68 points across their previous 9 games combined. Marino and the Dolphins netted 38. Pretty good. But the Dolphins were finding that any success came solely from the offense and almost in spite of the defense. In the divisional round of the playoffs that year, Miami squeaked out a win against the Cleveland Browns, who had nearly stopped the Dolphins in 2 ways. Defensively, Cleveland's backfield shut down Marino's favorite targets, the Marx brothers, which forced Marino to throw short or scramble. Offensively, they made a point of attacking the Dolphins' run defense. This nearly worked, and the following week in the AFC Championship game, the Patriots took a cue from Cleveland. The pressure from New England caused 6 Miami turnovers, 2 interceptions for Marino, and 4 fumbles on a wet day in Miami. The Patriots converted those turnovers into 24 points on their way to a commanding victory, a painful follow-up playoff exit for the Dolphins after last season's success. In '86, the bottom just fell out for the Dolphins defense. In a miserable Week 1 rout by San Diego, Miami gave up the second most points in franchise history up to that point, a distinction they'd make again just 2 weeks later against the Jets. By the end of the season, Miami's once great defense had given up more points than anyone in the AFC. There were a few reasons for the disintegration. Among the most consequential was the loss of inside linebacker A.J. Dewey, around whom Miami's defensive scheme was built. Marino was repeatedly left with the dubious task of outscoring the damage done by the Dolphins' porous defense. This, understandably, frustrated Marino. Your team not making the playoffs for the first time in 6 years despite carrying the league's best offense will do that to you. And not helping matters was Marino's continued friction with the Dolphins' front office. Marino was annoyed with the organization's tight wallet, noting how much money the franchise was making and how much more his peers were getting paid elsewhere. Before the season even started, rumors swirled that it would be Marino's last with Miami. Tensions were kinda high. Fans started to boo Marino at home. The Dolphins ultimately held on to Marino, but things didn't improve much over the next 3 seasons, and Miami missed the playoffs in each of them. '87 was truncated by a player strike after Week 2. When Marino and the regular starters returned in Week 7, disgruntled fans said Marino and his squad were so disappointing they wondered if they could have the replacement players back. After getting destroyed by the Bears in Week 1 of the '88 season, critics and players alike were immediately despondent, and they were right to be. The Dolphins followed a 6-win season in '88 with an 8-win season the following year. Before the 1990 season, coach Don Shula and team management made a number of changes to take some of the pressure off Marino. They used their top 2 draft picks that year to shore up the offensive line, with the goal to create more running room for second-year back Sammy Smith and their dormant ground game. And they replaced aging and injured veterans on the defensive side with an explicit focus on shoring up their run defense and keeping opponents beatable. After years of frustration, the moves paid off, and the Dolphins found their way back into the playoffs. But a recurring foe kept their progress in check. The Dolphins finished 1990 at 12-4, beat the Chiefs in the wild card game, and advanced to face their division rival, the Buffalo Bills. Between 1990 and 1995, the Dolphins and Bills met 3 times in the playoffs. None of them ended well for Marino or the Dolphins. The Bills were helmed by quarterback Jim Kelly, the third of those 5 quarterbacks drafted ahead of Marino back in 1983. The Dolphins' first playoff matchup against the Bills came in the 1990 divisional round. After scoring early, Kelly and the Bills held the lead for the entire game. Despite Miami's bounce-back season, their defense fell apart, and the blame was shouldered mostly by Dolphins safety Louis Oliver, who the Bills repeatedly torched before Miami benched Oliver at halftime. Another factor, according to the Dolphins at least, was the weather. Despite taking extra precautions for playing in the snow, the team from Florida spent most of the game on their literal asses while Kelly got hot. After an 8-8 season in 91, the Dolphins returned to the playoffs again in 92, shut out the Chargers 31-0 in the divisional round, and faced off against the Bills in the AFC Championship game. Despite coming off a 3-week hiatus for a knee injury, Kelly once again spanked the Dolphins en route to a 29-10 victory and their 3rd straight AFC Championship. Miami's defense couldn't stop the Bills' rush attack, but they also did themselves no favors on offense, turning the ball over 5 times, 3 of those on lost fumbles, and also allowing 4 sacks on Marino. Marino also gave up 2 interceptions and didn't throw his only touchdown until late in the 4th quarter with the game already out of hand. Marino's frustration after the game was palpable. He was 31, with many of his best years behind him, and it seemed like deep down, he suspected then what we know now to be the truth, that this would likely be the closest he'd get again to the Super Bowl. The Dolphins met the Bills again in the 95 playoffs, but a few key events had transpired in the intervening years. During the 93 offseason, Marino lost his favorite, though declining targets, in the Marx Brothers, Clayton in free agency to the Packers, and Duper, who was cut during training camp. Later that season, Marino went down with an Achilles tear that kept him out for the remainder of the year. And in 94, the Dolphins suffered another devastating playoff loss, this time to the Chargers in the divisional round. Up 21-6 at halftime, the Dolphins stopped San Diego on a potential scoring drive at their own 1.
Is he in? No! They stopped him just shy!
And then immediately gave up a safety on the next snap. After the Chargers turned that into another 7 points, they scored again with less than a minute remaining in the 4th quarter, putting the score at 22-21. The Dolphins put together a promising last-minute drive, helped along by a 32-yard pass interference call against the Chargers. But with seconds remaining, veteran kicker Pete Stoyanovich lined up for a game-winning 48-yard field goal and missed it. Wide right and short. Just brutal. So, a year later, and back to the Bills. After limping into the wild card game in 95 with a 9-7 record, critics and fans both knew that if there was ever going to be a time to get the Lombardi Trophy into the hands of either Marino or Don Shula, whose last Super Bowl win was 1973, that window was rapidly closing. The Bills dumped 27 points on the Dolphins through 3 quarters before Marino and the Dolphins could muster a response, which once again was too little, too late. Miami's run defense in that game allowed a franchise-worst 341 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. Marino did his damnedest with his own commanding performance, but the high-wire act had failed once again, and the ruse of Miami being anything other than a one-dimensional team evaporated. Bills defensive end Phil Hansen even said it looked like the Dolphins tried to run but just gave up. By the end, Buffalo alone had outscored Miami by a combined 44 points over 3 postseason games from 1990 through 1995. A week later, Don Shula, with another year remaining on his contract, announced his surprise retirement. It was a sour end to the head coach's otherwise legendary career. Players were shocked, including Marino. But Shula admitted he was frustrated, and the critics said that given the way Miami had been playing, it was the most dignified time for him to go. The Dolphins immediately started their search for a new head coach, and just as immediately settled on a favorite, Jimmy Johnson, formerly of the Dallas Cowboys and commentator for Fox. Within the week, it was a done deal, and JJ became the Dolphins head coach. Local writers and fans loved the match. Johnson knew how to win, they said, perhaps forgetting that he replaced the winningest coach in NFL history. Ownership had great faith that Johnson could come in and make something happen with the remaining weapons the Dolphins had at their disposal. Even Marino was excited. But from the outset, Johnson knew that the key to success was actually to wean Miami off of Marino. Johnson was hip to the importance of preparing for days when Marino wasn't up to snuff, a very, very rare occurrence, he stressed, by bolstering the offense's ground game and shoring up the defense. This proved to be harder than it looked. Midway through a middling season, Miami hopeful panicked. The run game that Johnson had planned to rely on never materialized. Over time, his relationship with Marino suffered, especially after Johnson fired offensive coordinator Gary Stevens, a holdover from the Don Shula years, at the end of the '97 season. In an effort to take more control and responsibility of his struggling team, Johnson revoked Marino's ability to call plays at the line of scrimmage, which Marino claimed was like playing with one arm tied behind his back. With Johnson at the helm, Marino and the Dolphins never saw past the second round of the playoffs. Johnson tried retiring after the third year of his 4-year contract. Despite their strained relationship, Marino encouraged him to return for his 4th year, but frustrations continued to mount. A particularly bad dust-up after a Monday Night Football loss to the Bills caused whatever relationship was left to completely dissolve. But some still held out hope that despite the odds, despite the inconsistent offense, despite his age, Marino could still make it happen in the playoffs. The Dolphins clawed into the 1999 playoffs with a 9-7 record and moved to the divisional round after a wild-card win against the Seahawks. What went down in that final game of the season, and the final game of Dan Marino's career, is the stuff of perverse legend. A 62-7 drubbing by the Jacksonville Jaguars, the largest margin of victory in a modern-era playoff game. It was an abysmal showing by the team, but particularly Marino, who put up embarrassing numbers. He said afterwards he had never experienced a game like that in his life. Fans called for Marino to retire. The next day, Jimmy Johnson beat him to the punch and announced his resignation. A couple of months later, Marino would join him, opting out of the final 2 years of his contract and ending his 17-year career with the Miami Dolphins. 5 years later, Marino was elected to the Hall of Fame in the first year of his eligibility. During his acceptance speech, he thanked his 2 favorite targets, the Marx brothers, and threw this final declarative pass to Mark Clayton in the middle of the crowd. He said at the time that it was what every retired quarterback wanted. One more shot, one more chance to go deep and win it all. But part of it was also a reminder for both himself and his fans. A reminder of when his name was on the lips of every football fan in the country and when every quarterback wanted to be him. An example of what he was capable of and how good he was at it. And evidence that even though much time had passed and the peak of his career was barely visible in the distance, it would still stand there forever, visible to all, despite the fact that Dan Marino never got a ring.